Thank you so much. What an amazing room. I am so pleased and so honored to be with you today. Really, my most important message to you is a message of thank you. I owe you a debt of gratitude personally, and the United States government owes you a debt of gratitude. Because in my work, monitoring and fighting this ancient, relentless sickness that is anti-Semitism, I have no more important address than the ADL. There are many fine Jewish organizations out there, but there is one organization that is synonymous with the fight against anti-Semitism and with the fight against ethnic and religious hatred and intolerance, and that's ADL. Thank you to Esther Epstein. Thank you to Jonathan Greenblatt. What amazing leaders you have. Ken Jacobson, who's been with the ADL forever and got an award last night. Ken, you're amazing. We're so grateful to you. Special shout out to my AE Pi brother, Cliff Schechter, of your national leadership team. And you know, when I tell you ADL is a go-to address, that's not just a line. I want to give you an example, a very recent example. I just got back from Eastern and Central Europe. My first trip that involved bilateral meetings with foreign governments was a trip to Eastern and Central Europe. And for every country I visited, I relied heavily on ADL's work product. In fact, the briefings I received from ADL were a key part of my preparation, in addition to all of our government resources, a key part of my preparation in going to those countries and having specific strategies and specific asks for ways we can improve upon the situation in those countries. And so I cannot thank you enough, and your work product and your impact was felt literally in the last few weeks. Before those visits to those countries in Central and Eastern Europe, I want to tell you what else I did. 4 weeks ago, 4.5 weeks ago was Yom HaShoah. And on Yom HaShoah, I had the great privilege to participate in the first ever official United States government delegation to March of the Living. That's right. 6 United States ambassadors, our ambassadors to Poland, to Israel, to Germany, the Vatican, Switzerland, Spain, and I, marched arm in arm, shoulder to shoulder, on that terrible walk from Auschwitz to Birkenau. We did that with tens of thousands of others, students, young adults, activists, faith leaders, who came to bear witness, who came to be accounted for, and who came to say never again. And then, hours later, we boarded a plane and we flew to Israel. And the very next day, after being in that abyss of death, next to the gas chambers and the crematoria, we again were arm in arm and shoulder to shoulder. But this time, at the Kotel, dancing and celebrating Shabbat. It was Friday night, and dancing and celebrating Shabbat together with IDF soldiers and students and visitors, reveling in a celebration of life. And at that moment, the message was driven home that in celebrating the state of Israel, we are celebrating not only a country and not only the birthday of a founding, but we are celebrating humanity's greatest response to history's greatest evil, the building out of the ash of 6 million, a country that is decent and just and democratic and free and a beacon of innovation for the world. Truly tikkun olam. That's what the state of Israel represents. And do you know what else? is a great human answer to injustice? The ADL. In 1913, as anti-Semitism was rising in Europe after the conviction of Leo Frank, this organization answered in terrifying prescience that trend by building an organization not only dedicated to fighting anti-Semitism, but how wonderful it is that the organization was dedicated to fighting intolerance and injustice and hatred of all kinds and of all stripes. And that brings me to today. In Central and in Eastern Europe, I confronted the anti-Semitic threat of those far-right ethnic supremacist movements that are on the rise in parts of Europe. We confronted it. We had specific requests of those governments. And I'm happy to report that our interlocutors are making every effort to answer the specific requests I put forth. But what I want to talk to you about today is the fastest growing kind of anti-Semitism, and that is the anti-Semitism that clothes itself in the language of anti-Zionism and Israel hatred. This is the anti-Semitism of the West European street, of intellectual circles, and of the US college campuses. And it is no less dangerous than the other flavors and other forms of anti-Semitism. In my line of work, Jew hatred is Jew hatred. Whether it comes from one side or the other, we're going to fight it and confront it. This kind of anti-Semitism is often called the new anti-Semitism. But I'm here to tell you that there is nothing new about it, because everything it does and every manifestation that comes out of it is the same old anti-Semitism from years past, rebranded and repackaged. How about the blood libels, the medieval blood libels leveled against the Jewish people? Well, it's no different in this so-called new anti-Semitism. The blood libels are leveled against the Jewish state, accusing the state of Israel of preposterous crimes, of genocide and apartheid. How about delegitimization of the Jewish people that we've seen in so many diaspora communities over so many decades and so many centuries? Same old thing. The state of Israel delegitimized. Its very existence questioned, its right to exist undermined. How about terminology? The same old terminology. A European Jewish leader was just recently called a dirty Zionist, as though the substitution of a term might confuse us as to what is really meant. How about the obsessive pathological hatred that we've again have seen in the traditional anti-Semitism over so many centuries? It's the same. A kid in a university, a prestigious university in the United States, gave me a math answer sheet. That's right, a math answer sheet. I have it in my possession. It says the integral of so-and-so is such and such, the derivative of such and such is so-and-so. And then it says, another day in the occupied Palestinian territories, occupation forces, Zionist forces killing children. And then it goes back to math. And the kid who gave me this, you know what he told me? He said to me, with a voice of exhaustion, in math class, I can't get away from this stuff? In math class? Same obsessive hatred. How about justifications? Anti-Semitism over the centuries, over the millennia, always found justifications. Things that we supposedly did, things that we supposedly are doing. Even Kristallnacht, justified by the assassination of a German diplomat by a Jew. Not made up, true. But we all know that Kristallnacht really wasn't a response to one thing one Jew did. It came out of German anti-Semitism. Similarly, this new anti-Semitism is always premised upon and grasps as justification one thing or another that the state of Israel actually did or is said to have done. But we all know that it's not really about Israeli policy. It is the same old hatred, obsessive hatred, that is seeking justification in Israeli policy. And finally, economic isolation. The Juden boycott, those Nazi brown shirts holding signs, kauft nicht bei Juden. Well, the German Bundestag just voted that the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement leveled against the state of Israel is anti-Semitism, pure and simple. And in fact, the German Bundestag, that's right, thank you, Germany. They also said in this legislation, and they ought to know, that the BDS movement reminds everybody of the Juden boycotts of the 1930s. And so that's what this so-called new anti-Semitism is. And why is it so important that we unite to fight it? To fight it with every bit of vigor and every bit of dedication as we need to exhibit in our fight against the other kinds of anti-Semitism. Because, my friends, this kind of anti-Semitism is working. It is working. A recent poll done of American Jewish college students shows that Jewish students on college campuses today are less supportive of Israel than ever, more inclined to blame Israel for problems in the world than ever before. And it's because of the climate on US college campuses. I recently spoke at the Israel Festival in Los Angeles, and after I spoke at the festival, an evangelical kid, there was a whole group of Christian evangelicals there as volunteers. He came up to me and he says, I love Israel. And I asked him, Matthew, let me ask you a question. Is it true that young evangelicals are less supportive of Israel than ever before? He says, absolutely, that's true. I said, why is it? And he said to me, because we also go to college. We also hear what's being said. We are also in that same context, the same milieu, the same indoctrination. This is, my friends, a moment of decision for us. What we see in Europe and what we see here in the United States is a combustible cauldron of anti-Semitism from the ethnic supremacist right, from the vicious anti-Zionist left, and from radical Islam. They operate together, they borrow each other's language, and they paint each other's symbols on Jewish institutions. And we have to decide that today there is no room for disunity in the Jewish world. The times are too urgent, the crisis too great. And if we are serious about fighting all anti-Semitism, now is the time for us to come together, one voice. We are in the final week of the counting of the Omer. And what is the counting of the Omer about? It is the process of transition from the liberation of slaves physically out of Egypt to the emotional liberation of the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. 49 days. And we count those days to mark increasing levels of spiritual elevation. But what is the message? To what end did the Jewish people progress in those 49 days until they got to Mount Sinai? The Torah tells us that it was a journey of unity, and that the prerequisite for the Jewish people receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai, the greatest moment in the history of our people, was that the Jewish people united as never before. It is said that the Jewish people stood at the foot of Mount Sinai, ish echad belev echad, one body with one heart, one beating heart. That's what it took. No less than that is what it took. And today, as we mark 75 years, only 75 years, since the crematoria stopped operating, they have barely cooled. And we see our survival threatened again. In Europe, of all places, and in Latin America, and in the Middle East, and now in the United States. And so today I ask of the Jewish world, and especially of you, the organization that defines this fight, that we stand together, ish echad belev echad, and that we don't weaponize anti-Semitism, that we don't politicize anti-Semitism, and that we decide that Jew hatred is Jew hatred, and that we will fight it everywhere and anywhere it rears its ugly head. If we decide that, my friends, if we decide that, and if we act that way, we will truly build tikkun olam b'malchut Shaddai, and we will build that better future that our children, that our grandchildren so richly deserve. Thank you so much. God bless you. Thank you for everything you do.